Now these are two formulae that we have already covered, the nominal GDP of a given year and the real GDP of a given year. I want to remind you that if there are multiple goods produced by the economy, which is true in the real world, the economy does produce multiple goods and services, then you need to find this out for every individual good and aggregate it over all those goods or services that are produced. Now, like I said in the previous video, we are interested in knowing the growth rate or percentage change in real GDP. The growth rate or percentage change of real GDP. Now, growth rate of real GDP is given as the real GDP of year 2 minus the real GDP of year 1 divided by the real GDP of year 1 times 100. Since it's a rate, it always has to be a percentage and it must be multiplied by 100. So that's also a difference between this. These are always going to be in terms of dollars, whereas the growth rate is always a percentage. Now year 2 is always going to be your most recent year. Okay. So if you are finding the growth rate of real GDP between 2018 and 2015, then your year 2 is your 2018 and 2015 is your year 1. Now let's say my base year, my year 2 is 2018 and my year 1 is 2015 and my base year is the year 2010. So basically you are looking at doing quantity of 2018 times the price of 2010 minus the quantity of 2015 times the price of 2010. So basically you are plugging in the formula for real GDP to calculate the real GDP of those years, right? Same thing, the quantity of 2015 times the price of 2010. You are using the real GDP formula from number 2 and you are calculating the real GDPs and then plugging them into the growth rate formula. Now once again, just knowing the real GDP is not enough, because the population of the country could also play into how the country is actually performing macroeconomically. Okay, so two countries may have the same real GDP, yet their macroeconomic situation may not be the same. Because if a country has a lot of population, if it has a large population, then basically that real GDP is getting distributed between a lot of people. So every individual, every citizen is getting a smaller share of the real GDP of the country. Right? So it is also important to play in population in order to understand what is the macroeconomic health of the country. So to understand the role of population, we have another measure, which is the real GDP per capita, per person. You can imagine in United States, the real GDP per capita is almost $59,000. Whereas for Bolivia, that same real GDP per capita is around $3,000. So you can see that kind of tells you the difference between the standard of living of the people in those two countries, right? In United States, every year, every person has a share of $59,000, whereas in Bolivia, it's only $3,000 per person's share. So real GDP per capita for any given year is the real GDP of that year, of that given year, same, divided by the population of the country during that year. The population in that given year. So once again, you need the information about the base year. You can never calculate this real GDP unless you know what is the base year. So that must be told. And you should know, in order to know the per capita, you should know what is the population of the given year. So these are some important measures, and once again you could also find the growth rate of real GDP per capita by doing the same thing, year 2 minus year 1 divided by year 1 times 100, but please note that there you would use the real GDP per capita numbers because you are finding the growth rate of real GDP per capita. So the year 2 minus year 1 divided by year 1, that stays the same, but you use real GDP per capita instead of just real GDP. Okay. Now the last and final formula which you must know is the connection, what is the relationship between nominal GDP and real GDP. Now when you take a ratio of the nominal GDP of a given year divided by the real GDP of that same given year, when you do this, when you take a ratio of the nominal with the real, you end up getting the GDP deflator of the country for that particular year. There's a very important formula. You are getting the GDP deflator of this given year. What is the GDP deflator? The GDP deflator is basically an indicator of the average price level in the economy. Are the prices going up or down? It is an index of price. So it is a price index. It's a macroeconomic price index that tells you what is the average price level in the country. Okay, so please note that the GDP deflator is not a dollar value, it's just a real number because it's an index. Okay, so the GDP deflator, if you have the GDP deflator of 2017 and 18, and for 18 the number is bigger, it simply means that in 2018 your economy has become more expensive. The prices in the economy on an average has gone up in 2018. That is the meaning of GDP deflator. So with that, I have come to an end of module 3 unit 1. In the next video, we will go to module 3 unit 2, where we will talk about another indicator of the macroeconomy, and there we will be talking about the unemployment rate of the economy, which is an important indicator of macroeconomic status of a country.